I urge you, if you haven't already, to take a look at the document that's linked to in the live chat. The question here is, should we ship the Soroban built-in token contract with Soroban or scrap it given the alternatives? And the document starts to outline the alternatives. The first alternative is a sort of a stellar asset contract, and the second alternative is a custom asset. And it starts to list out the benefits and trade-offs of each of those approaches. And I think that we will, again, sort of delve into that in a minute. But for now, while we wait for various people on the call to deal with a Wi-Fi issue, please just take a look at the doc, read through it, start to gather your thoughts. This is okay, cool.
Hey, Justin, am I coming through?
Yes, you
Awesome.
are.
Is our Siddharth and Nico available?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So I think like we have two agenda items for today. One of them is to finalize some of the details on the stellar asset contract, and then it's discussing the built-in token contract. I think we should probably start with Siddharth and finalizing the stellar asset contract so that we can get that implemented and out of the way as soon as possible. So Sid, can you take us through the pending questions?
Yeah. First, I'll go over the like trust line semantics and just like some interesting edge cases. So in the single balance world, we transfers to and from the issuer will actually burn and mint the way that works in Classic right now. And related to this, we don't actually have a burn function that allows the token holder to burn their own balance. But sending to the issuer accomplishes this. So I think we should add that like a burn and burn from function to the contract, and this is something that exists on other token contracts as well.
Does it exist in the ERC20?
It exists in the OpenSuplin implementation. So I think it makes sense to add it. A question I had related to this is: do we care that transfers involving the issuer are special, right? Because they can burn and mint, but an updated admin is not the same. Like, do we care about that? Like, there could be some confusion, right? Where someone maybe make the assumption that if you send to the admin, it mints and burns, which is true, if you don't change the admin, but it's not once you do.
Yeah, I think we need to differentiate between the issuer account and the admin in this case. And I think that if an issuer specifically sets their admin to something else but the issuer account, then they should know what they're doing. So this doesn't sound to me too problematic.
Okay. So some other details is authorized. Will always return true for the issuer, right? Because the issuer can always should always be able to transfer. And then clawback from the issuer should fail. Clawing back from the issuer should fail. Other than that, the other question is: do we allow admin controls on trust lines? All right, like when I say admin controls, I mean like authorize, deauthorize, and clawback from the token contract. And if we do, the authorization, like you have to pretty much implement all the everything related to trust line authorization semantics that's in Classic in the token contract. So is that something we want to do?
I would say that, and other folks feel free to chime in. My intuition is that ideally, yes, if we are treating these, stellar asset contract as stellar assets, we do need to have the most or as much control as we do have in Stellar Classic. With that said, I do think that the issuers that are actively using these type of semantics, already they have them implemented with Stellar Classic operations, and also, they're just not that many of them. So Yeah, I feel like if it helps implementation, we can start without having that and then add that later, if required. Although ideally, we should have that from the get-go.
Okay. Yeah, I think if the issuer doesn't change, then yeah, you could always do what you said. You could always just uh take like a do authorization in Classic. But if you try to use like a contract as the admin, then you have to deal with these edge cases if we don't allow admin controls on trust lines. But I agree that this is something we could we could write it initially without and then change it later if we see that it's an issue. Okay. So yeah, those are so that was related to trust line semantics. The next question, which is more interesting, is how non-account classic balances should be stored. And should they be stored in contract data? Should we use a special ledger entry? Should we include make contract data union and include like a first class type for balance? And the argument to do something like this is it would allow downstream consumers, Horizon or wallets, to actually query for balances, because right now it's just an arbitrary contract data, right? And we don't actually enforce a specific format of the balance. So if someone writes a custom token contract, we can't make any assumptions about what the data would look like. And so we could actually add a host function that says write balance, and then we enforce, and it follows a specific spec, and we can expect that.
Quick clarifying question: what is a non-account classic balance?
Yes, so it's a say like when a contract holds, say USDC, it won't have a trust line, right? Because the trust lines are only for Stellar accounts. So how would that balance stored for the for the Soroban contract look? Or if you had a smart wallet, it wouldn't have a trust line. It would just be stored in contract data at the moment.
Doesn't that also apply to any like any other token contract, not just the classic ones?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess this question is related to token contracts in general. But sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead,
so
Tomer.
I'm with Nico here. Like, if we're gonna have, if we're gonna have, non-asset contract tokens, that are going to, especially if they're custom assets, are going to hold balances in dedicated ledger entry. I think we shouldn't special case contracts at the Stellar asset contract balances. That is, it can be the same mechanism for regular assets. So I think my vote here is not to have a special ledger entry, just to have like a regular contract data entry, and then we can have downstream systems that are intelligent enough to understand what's a supported balance, and do they want to ingest it and present it to the user.
Are you saying sorry, go ahead, Nico.
No, like I think that the problem that Sid describes is actually, yeah, like so it's the general, yeah, like think of the general. You take like any arbitrary Soroban token, right? That was published on the network. Right now, if somebody creates like any entity, right? Doesn't matter, like an account, a contract, decides to have a balance with that custom contract, there is actually no way to kind of reverse lookup for a given account, for example, which tokens they have a balance with. You can't, yeah, there's like nothing on the, yeah, like there's no equivalent to, like today, right? Like you go to Horizon and you can ask Horizon, hey, give me all the tokens I have in my wallet. we can't even discover that. Like so I know that in the Soroban world, it's a opt-in. Like you basically sorry, that's not opt-in. It's well, from the wallet point of view, you add tokens to your wallet, right? But then there's no way to actually discover the things you have, the actual balances that you have. This is, I think, an opportunity. I think for us here is to actually standardize a little bit on at least this discovery aspect, so that at a minimum, I would say so there's like different levels of standardization that can happen, but like it could be as simple as knowing that that an entry is actually related to a token that's deployed right to the network. There would be a way to actually advertise that this is actually implementing a specific spec in a way that's a little more a little like first class, basically, because what we're talking about here is the token contract is actually the thing that we that even if you're not using the built-in classic token, right, that implements that interface, it is still a common interface that is, maybe like the preferred one, right, that we want people to use. And by using that, you get additional benefits like discovery, I think, is what I'm talking about.
Isn't that some... Sorry, go ahead, Lee.
I think I understand I think I understand where we're going with this, but I think we start to constrain like what people can do with custom tokens if we start saying that the data has to look a certain way, because we're sort of starting to prescribe the implementation details rather than the interface. So like right now we have this interface, and that interface allows you to get the balance for any identifier. But really, what has to happen to get that balance back isn't defined, and so
this is actually very similar to, like as part of the spec, you have to emit events, specific events. Mm-hmm. This is a similar thing for allowing to discover that, like there is a possibility to balances. I think that's like on the one extreme end, I would say. There are like other things you can do that is just like, hey, this ledger entry represents the balance, right? So we're actually kind of getting people to be more in that stress line world, right? That we don't actually specify how that stress line is actually implemented. If that makes sense.
Right, but what if there's, so what I was wanting to get to is, what if there isn't a ledger entry that actually represents, like, for that one account? So, what if a token's balances are represented by a Merkle tree or something else like that? Suddenly we don't have, like, I think this makes the assumption that there's one specific ledger entry for every identifier. But
I do want to ask Nico, why aren't standard events that are emitted from token contracts, why are these not enough in order to facilitate the discovery of tokens, balances, and such?
Like events are when you do something, right? Like if you receive or send something, right, from an account, to and from an account, right? But like you don't, if you're catching up to the network, you don't have historical data from Genesis that would give you this information.
Right, but supposedly you'd probably, if you want this functionality, you probably use a downstream system that will actually catch up and process all of these events.
Right, so the bar becomes much higher, right? Like you need to basically have, in order for a wallet to discover the tokens that it has control over, it has to interface with a full history system.
Right, which is what, like if you look at the, Ethereum ecosystem, like, various indexers.
No, I understand what Ethereum does, right? But like, I think there's an opportunity here to kind of do something that is a little more user-friendly, a little more like what we do in Classic, without the Classic restrictions. We're talking purely here about, like the general token contract.
I think this also protrudes on this other issue that I think Sid wants to talk about today, which is whether we actually make these opt-in balances or not opt-in. Because I think if we're not making them opt-in, and we are making them discoverable through some standard, then that is kind of like an opportunity for like claimable balances style spam.
Well, like I'm not sure I understand the argument here. Like you're saying that if the data is available, you're not forced to use it, right? Like yes, it is like claimable balances, but at least you have this data set, yeah. Then then it's up to the wallet to decide if they want to use it. But I think having the access to this data is a fairly powerful way to actually, when you create when you install, let's say, an app on your phone, a wallet, you don't need to talk to any kind of like those expensive systems that are like full history systems. I think that's kind of what I'm saying.
You don't necessarily need a full system, like full history system, to get balances, though, right? You just need to know which contracts are tokens. So you need a list of tokens from somewhere, right?
Right.
I think I was just joining to say I think I agree with Lee in general, though. Like, an interface-driven integration system seems a lot more powerful than doing shenanigans with ledger keys and assuming that data is in the right spot. Because it lets any implementation. I mean, it's harder for downstream systems, right? Because you need to actually run the contract and stuff potentially, but I'd say it's probably worth it.
Add that I think this is an actual problem on the like Ethereum side. I just don't know that forcing like I think this is a requirement or a problem that we should track and discuss, but maybe not start with this as the solution, because like this is what drove a lot of like OpenSea's growth, right? Is they provided an API that indexed and told wallets what NFTs people owned, and so solving that problem was difficult for wallets, and so providing a solution for that was valuable to the ecosystem. But I don't know that we want to force like standards on every contract in order to solve this problem. There might be a lighter weight solution that we could identify.
Just in terms of framing this problem, Nico and Sid, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Are we actually talking about this specifically in the context of the Stellar Acid contract, or is the suggestion to have this ledger entry be effectively part of the interface or the standard, so that any asset implements this?
The idea would be for it to be used in any token contract. Now, obviously, we can't enforce that. If someone writes a custom token contract and they store the data in a different way, but it's a standard that we could move people towards.
Yeah, I think Sid makes an important point here, which is that there's no way for us to force a contractor to write any ledger entry. Right, this would just be a question of like, hey, there is one, and if by the incredibly high probability that exists that you want to write something that is compatible with this, you can use it, and then your balances will be discoverable. And like the fact that this is a standard account you'll look like every other account in the world. And then like if someone has some like bizarre representation they want to store things in, sure, they could pick their own bizarre representation, but we're not able to stop them. It's just a question of like providing a convenient default so that 90% cases work.
I think the issue with this is that defaults are really powerful, and they sort of create incentives. So we create this incentive that balances look a particular way, and then this is also something that the ecosystem maybe can't innovate on, as or maybe don't have the same freedom to innovate on, independent of the protocol.
Yeah, if that's the thing that people are kind of standardizing on, right? Then you could see Lightnet saying, okay, we're only gonna show NFTs that have this ledger entry thing, right? Which now means you have to do that if you want it to show up in places.
This is not about NFTs. I'm sorry. This is about the token contract interface.
Sure. Okay. Or tokens. I was trying to think of a better example than Lightment, but
So I just want to pause and backtrack to one design thing in Soroban. So Soroban early on made a choice. I pushed for a choice. I'll just admit it, which was that we would have a very, very standard structured data format that we write ledger entries in, specifically so that downstream consumers could consume those ledger entries without going through contracts. So they could just look at it passively as data, as data to index. And so like we could have gone with the serialization format. It's very opaque, very just a blob. We have no idea what it is, and we didn't do that. We wanted it very standardized, structured, like these maps with vectors and symbols and numbers, and it's like very traversable. And part of the reason for that is to let people ingest data passively. And so that channel you're talking about, where downstream consumers can essentially create an incentive to write data in a particular format, that's there already. And I think it should be there. I think it's actually a very reasonable way to do low touch, low coordination, publish and subscribe between parties. Events, as has been noted, events are not persistent in the sense that you can't join the network and then suddenly read them all out, and you can for ledger entries. And so standardized ledger entries that downstream parties read is like part of the design. Now, whether those ledger entries are, we're going to look for maps that have symbols at a certain location that have certain names on them, that's the type of standard we're looking for, versus something that has an XDR definition for its structure, which is a little bit more rigid, I'll admit. Either way, you're going to have this phenomenon, and it's intentional. And I think it's good. I think on balance between, your two options here are basically like I can look at data, or I absolutely can't. And every time I want to do data access, I have to spin up a VM and call a method on it. And I think the former is better. Like, it's public data, right? You're not doing anyone any favors by making them jump through hoops to read it.
yeah, that's fair. What's the there's like a Rob Pike Go thing of like communicating via sharing memory versus sharing memory by communicating or whatever, and it's like the same kind of tension, but it's not necessarily one
like and encapsulation in
work,
general.
right?
Sure, of course, there's private representation. Encapsulation in general is a concept, but
Yeah, of course. I'm saying, I guess one's not necessarily better. It's just kind of what is the standard, basically, right? That we're pushing people towards. Is it like a data structure standard or like a code interface kind of thing?
I think you'll get the data structure standard unless we backtrack a lot, unless we really go out of our way, because it's there and it's readable and it's going to be vastly cheaper to access. So like, why would someone not look at it?
Will this work for balances that need to be calculated, or will they have to be run through the VM and through the interface? Like, for example, like an AMM pool share. So those, I believe, the pool shares are usually like it's stored in the as like the calculated value in the contract. So the contract could use this mechanism and store it in that ledger entry or special contract data. Well, I guess what I mean is like your shares calculate down to some amount of assets on either side, or like in a a staking pool, for example, where it's like you own changing. Does that mean that you then need to
calculated for each one of those entries, or is that discoverable in this thing, like by reading the data directly?
I mean, if you store those values, then you can discover them. But if you need to do calculations like on a get balance call, then like that wouldn't work. But I don't see why you wouldn't be able to store anything you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
I do have one other question. Let's, you were stating that this will make it easier for downstream systems to do things like, fetch all the balances for a specific account. This still means that the downstream system needs to index this data, right? Like they don't get it, they don't get this index for free from core, right?
This gives them the option to, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, without this, you just, query contract data by contract IDs that you have to know beforehand, and parse through the contract data keys and values.
Yes, for downstream systems, it's not either or necessarily, right? Like they could get a contract, look in the spec, say, okay, does this look like a token? Cool, looks like a token. Is there a ledger entry? Read that directly. Oh, there's no ledger entry. Okay, let me actually launch the WASM and get the data from there if I need to, right? So it's not like a can kind of degrade gracefully a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's hard boundary. I think there is a signal of intent by making a specific ledger entry, and maybe that has some strength or weakness if you're trying to avoid locking people into things. But either way, downstream systems can grovel through the data.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of it as like it's like an optimization, right?
I'm concerned about this. It's very special. Like we're looking at the kind of like the standard token interface, and now it's not just you adhere to these functions and you adhere to these like event structures. You also need to adhere to this storage mechanism or shape. It's very special.
Why does that concern you?
Why does being special concern me?
Yes.
I think we need to be different where it counts, and where there is no kind of like orders of magnitude improvements. We need to, just do the expected thing.
Okay, but I mean, I'll say this directly. Direct data access is definitely orders of magnitude faster than calling contracts in order to get information. To make data reasonably readable.
Right, and we don't like I don't think that we're going to like what we're what we're actually changing is like how complex downstream systems need to be, right? Because when I go in MetaMask and I check my balance of USDC, no one is starting, no one is calling any RPC service here. It's it's calling a downstream system that has indexed all this information, Etherscan in this case. So like I don't think this actually translates to people are not going to start loading up a VM for checking balances. Or there's a downstream system that is going to do that once and then index that information.
Yeah, I'm just talking about how much work the downstream system winds up doing to be accurate. Circles.
Maybe we could. I mean, like, I would be interested actually to hear what somebody like Orbitlens, thinks about this stuff, because when I think of like the type of things that happen there, right? Like having to spin up WASM when you're trying to do any kind of aggregation on token information sounds, super expensive.
Can people hear me okay? What's happening here?
Yeah, I can hear you, Justin. Orbit. I'm not sure if Orbit is speaking. I see his microphone's off, but I don't hear him. Does
Yeah,
anyone else?
I don't hear him either. I thought maybe it was just an audio issue on my end, but I think Orbit, if you're speaking, there's something happening on your end and we can't hear you. I think it really would be good to hear your perspective on this. Okay, so he's working on it. And he's
But
saying
is Orbit
continue.
really the because Orbit does ingest the entire history, so from his perspective, I don't think it should matter. Like it's for downstream systems that like try to be more lightweight without catching up to full history, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a question here of what the next move is in this conversation. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, so I think I think what we uncovered is that like there's a question here that's beyond the question of the details of the Stellar asset contract. It's about the details of the token standard. So I think we need to frame that in that context, and maybe for now go on with questions that are specific to the Stellar asset. And clearly we need to have a wider discussion on what the standard token interface is. Does it include the storage layout or not?
I would just like to say one more thing about like one of the question I might understand correctly. Siddharth's questions is a bespoke ledger entry versus the contract data ledger entry, and I think we can answer that. And I think Graydon actually in some ways answered that when he said like that the contract data, the way that that's designed and the way that all the type system is designed is it's already structured. So when we say like contract data versus a ledger entry, another more special ledger entry, we're not gaining really more specific. We're not gaining structure out of that. We've already got structured contract data, and so it does seem a little bit odd that we would start special casing like into other ledger entries. I think given that we already have structured data.
Billy, how would you know if a ledger entry is just arbitrary, like I-128 value versus like a balance by the key?
Yeah, it's got
Yeah,
a key
right.
that says I'm a standard balance. Like you can just put like strings
Yeah,
and symbols
either
and stuff on.
a symbol but I mean this is sort of actually the point of the contract data. It's like there's that balance between structure and flexibility. So if in a year's time the ecosystem comes up with some new type of balance they want to store, they don't need anybody to create a new bespoke ledger entry. They can just start forming their own contract data with an appropriate structure, and then systems start understanding that structure and ingesting it. And no coordination really needs to happen for that to that can just happen in a decentralized way because we provided the bare the minimal building blocks to make structured contract data.
I guess my question is for Siddharth and Nico. Is that sufficient, or do we need a special ledger entry?
Yeah, I don't think we need a special ledger entry. We did discuss, maybe making contract data a union. This would allow you to, or something that would allow you to query, for balances. Because I believe if you just use contract data as is, you would have to process all the contract data like for a specific contract, right? You wouldn't be able to say give me all the balances. Is that right? because the balance is, it may have, it usually has like the account ID, like in the key.
Yeah, that's right. You'd wind up having to do some kind of a linear scan.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that there's not a lot more information stored under a token than all of the balances, in the sense of like, I don't maybe I'm just deceiving myself in how complicated the per user data that the contract is storing is, but I would assume that if you want to fetch all the balances, that's on the same order of magnitude as fetching all of the data that the contract is storing, period.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that we need to think about this more, right? So yeah, we can. I think this is something we should maybe discuss offline. Maybe come up with something more concrete. Maybe this is just like a discussion point at a very high level.
One thing. Could I just ask? Are you talking about doing that type of operation from inside of a contract or from outside of a contract?
When you say operation, what do you mean?
Get me all the balances.
Outside.
So doing that from outside, you kind of have a free hand to invent any kind of a querying system you want, right? So then it's just an I/O cost, right? You're not talking about VM cost.
Yeah.
Host object interface, right? You're just saying like, how much I/O do I have to spend in order to do? I'm more comfortable with just saying it's probably the same order of magnitude, but to just look at it associated with the contract.
Sorry, what did you say you were more comfortable with?
With just leaving it to scan all the data associated with the contract.
Okay.
Look for the stuff.
Okay.
It would be harder to do that from within a VM. You need to come up with some
Yeah.
kind of non-point access function.
Okay, cool. So Sid, do you feel like you have what you need to sort of get into writing the concrete details to take this forward, to move this forward?
I think we just like before I do that, I think we probably need to have like another discussion, but I think we can do that at a later date. Tomer, do you agree?
Yeah, I think so too. And that discussion needs to be scoped as kind of like what is the standard token interface. It's more than like about the Stellar Asset contract.
Yeah. Then I don't think there's anything else to discuss related to single balances. Is there anything, Tomer, that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think we actually explicitly answer the question of should these entries be created automatically or be opt-in like trust lines.
Yeah. So I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't make them opt-in. It adds more friction for the user. I believe Nico feels like would take the other side on that. I've heard people complain about the hassle of working with trust lines, but I think there are people who appreciate them as well. Do you have an opinion, Tomer?
Yeah, I think they should not be opt-in. I think this should
Yeah.
be kind of like regular ERC20 like territory in which balances are implicitly created, and it's the job of downstream systems to actually filter and present. Yeah, and in terms of the classic Stellar wallets or wallets that are kind of like just active in Classic, because they're just using trust lines, the kind of like the same contract continues to be maintained between the user and the wallet.
Okay. So it sounds like they will not be opt-in. No one else has anything to say. Should we move on to the next question? Removing
No,
the
like before doing that, yeah, like I mean, I think maybe I raised that the last time. I don't remember, but like my objection to the making this opt out basically, right? Is and here we're talking about the built-in token contract for classic assets. Is that this is actually a thing where I would like the experience as an user be basically the one that we have in classic. That is, you don't get scam tokens in your wallet all the time, and regardless of how how your wallet is set up. So, and I'm thinking in particular, if your wallet is a smart wallet, as in you use a contract for storing your balances. I want to be in control over like what shows up in my wallet. I think that's kind of the
Well, the
yeah.
smart wallet is by nature, I'm opting in to owning a smart wallet, and once you do that, the actual, I think it makes sense for the software to be the thing that controls what's going to be shown to you or not. Like, why do we need to persist kind of like the trust line semantics within a smart wallet?
Well, like you have the because it's the classic experience in a way, like that you have a classic token. That's kind of my intuition on this, is that you kind of, or you want to be in control of that aspect at least, and I'm not sure how to do that. If like I know it, like I'm not talking about the in general, right? Like the token contract interface doesn't specify that stuff, right? You can do anything you want. But when you're using a classic token, it seems to me that there is actually a certain level of expectation that you have like a more curated experience. And
the experience is still curated in terms of your kind of like Stellar Classic account, but it's not curated when you go into like a smart contract territory, and I think that's okay. I think giving giving developers the power to decide what are the semantics that they want to have in their smart contracts.
so okay, so how do you give developers that control? Right now,
Well,
we're saying we basically make the choice for them. Like maybe that's what's missing. Is like, is there a way for me as a smart contract developer to basically say, I don't want randos to send me garbage.
no, it's a combination of the smart contract behavior, but also the actual UI behavior. Like the UI is the thing that should protect you here.
Nico, any response to that claim that Tomer just made?
I mean, pushing. I mean, like I thought a lot of the arguments for the single balance, all that stuff, was to not push complexity into clients, and this sounds exactly like that.
And we're not pushing, like you're talking about clients for smart wallets. The clients for the classic Stellar account that just show you trust lines, that's not going to be a problem there. Like it's only if the user opts in to a smart wallet, and if they opt into a smart wallet, they're probably using some piece of software that has an interface on top of that smart wallet that is opinionated about that.
Right. I guess maybe this is actually tied to the asset discovery thing that we just punted on. Like because if we standardize on asset discovery, then yeah, like you need maybe a way to flag things as, yeah, this is something I want to take, pay attention to versus things that I don't want to pay attention to and I don't care. I mean, what I'm saying is that in a way, like we already see that in Classic, right? Well, I know this is like maybe the bar in Ethereum or whatever, but like claimable balances, what we see, with like people sending all those, phishing things or whatever, scam things, is not a great user experience.
Yeah, definitely it's not a great user experience, and we definitely don't want classic trust lines to be created on the fly without the user opting in. But I think the place where we don't see eye to eye, Nico, is that I think that if the user is opting into a smart wallet, then there's an opinionated tech stack there. I think the problem with claimable balances is that some wallets just showed you claimable balances, any claimable balance that comes in without having any mechanism for opting in or filtering. And that lesson definitely has been learned on claimable balances, and in other ecosystems, it's when I go to my Ethereum wallet, I'm not actually getting displayed with every balance that exists, only ones that have been whitelisted by some third party.
I mean, that seems fine, like as an approach, like for launch, like it's a dependency on those type of third-party infrastructure. So I guess like it will take some time to get this going. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's a dependency. I think that wallets will have to have an opinion there. Maybe they maintain a whitelist of assets that they show by default, and then for other assets, the user will have to opt in. We can figure out, wallets can figure this out even before you have sophisticated downstream systems that are doing this. Justin, should we touch on the built-in token contract, or do we not have enough time for that?
I mean, we have about 8 minutes. I actually think we should just move forward and start that discussion, because I think that's the best use of the next 8 minutes, to be honest.
Okay, let's do that. So I can kick off this discussion. Basically, as some of you know, since the inception of Soroban, we've included a built-in token contract, which is precompiled with Soroban environment. That token contract implements the Soroban token interface that we've defined. And an interesting implementation detail that might be worth mentioning is that it actually is both the Stellar asset contract and this standard token contract, the built-in token contract. They actually share the same code right now. But we realized it makes sense to talk about these things separately. And as we started talking about these things separately, the question came up: do we actually need to vendor a built-in token contract with Soroban, where people can deploy Stellar assets for the Stellar asset contract, and people then can deploy their own custom implementations for a contract. So should we actually still be thinking about shipping this built-in token contract, or should we scrap it in the beginning, perhaps add something like that later on? I would mention that it seems like most people have been pretty in favor of dropping the built-in token contract and potentially bringing something like this in later on. So I do want to ask the group here if someone wants to defend the built-in token contract and venerating it into Soroban from the get-go.
I mean, I'll make a
If anyone who's listening wants to jump in and defend, you can also raise your hand.
I'll make a weak
watching.
defense, which is just that it runs a lot faster. And if people make a whole lot of tokens that for whatever reason they don't want to have on Classic, this will be basically it. We can then add that back in later. It means that people. No.
Braden, your audio is a little spotty, but I think that you said that you would make a weak argument, which is that it will run faster. So if people want to issue these assets not on Classic, it will be faster. But it's a weak defense by your admission. Right?
I don't understand what the use case is for people who want to. I've never been super clear on who this token serves, because if you have custom logic, it's not going to work. And if you don't have custom logic, I don't understand why you don't want it to be accessible on Classic. So that it's a narrow audience, and I don't quite have a clear sense for them. But if they exist, if there is a bunch of people who are in that spot, it would be faster to have a native version.
It's like a weird halfway. It's like either you implement it yourself because you're doing something custom, or you want access to Classic. So
I do think there is, just in defense of this, there is a space, it might be a very narrow space in the middle, where you want something that the Stellar asset contract doesn't provide you, but it still behaves like a fairly normal token. For example, if I have some factory contract that wants to that programmatically creates new tokens, right now that is actually impossible because you need to create an issuer account, hand over control from the issuer account to a smart admin, and then remove yourself as the issuer. So there's like plumbing involved in getting a Stellar asset to be completely programmable.
Okay.
does that make stuff like liquidity pool shares harder to implement?
Right, especially if you have like a liquidity pool factory that creates these liquidity pools and their tokens. That is a situation in which you probably would have used the built-in token implementation, but now you would need to write your own custom one.
Yeah, so if there are legitimate use cases for them, and we can imagine them being like happening at a reasonably high frequency, I don't think the maintenance burden of keeping this thing around is particularly high, and it's a huge performance win anytime anyone touches it. Right, it's the difference between running. It's probably like a hundreds sort of level of cost. So if there's lots of transactions flowing through the system, this just gives you more performance overhead to have it around. So that I don't know. I'm not the person maintaining it, obviously. So I guess I would be in the future at some point. But I think it's mostly on Sid to say, is this something where having two separate code paths here and there in the native contract? If we don't have Dima here as well, but
I hear you. I think like an alternative to this, and I mentioned this in the doc, is to basically create this reference implementation for a token that we think really does provide most people with all they need, or most of what they need, not in the context of a Stellar asset, and then just put that as a reference implementation. And if it actually is getting as much usage as we expect it to, then we can later upgrade that to a native contract. And this, if I understand correctly, this should be easier now with Dima's changes of separating the kind of like the WASM upload from the instantiation logic.
I think it's possible. I don't know that swapping in place without having everyone either reinstantiate or like we don't have any operation for doing that quite seamlessly right now. But you know, we could try to make that an upgrading path so that we can nativize popular contracts in the future. But I wanted to hear from Sid. What was you were about to speak? What was your sense of the maintenance burden of having the extra code paths around?
I don't think this decision should be made based off of like the maintenance burden. It's not that bad. I do think specifically for the implementation. If we do keep it, it should be pulled out, and I think we should actually use two separate contracts. But you know that I don't think that should like affect the decision to keep it or not. Like if we think people will use it.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's, I don't think it's about implementation. It's more about like, I think use cases and where we want to take this, the classic token contract. To me, this is more about, I mean, like a lot of things that are kind of to take into account here is that you want to maybe avoid fragmentation from the get-go. Like I can see, for example, some of the use cases that, you know, where we're like, oh yeah, this doesn't work exactly right now. Well, why not make the improvements to classic or whatever so that we bridge those gaps instead of actually fragmenting the ecosystem completely on that token, right? So I can see how like there's enough unknowns that I would rather not do anything yet. That's kind of my preference, but yeah. And kind of as we go, we will understand actually better, like those use cases. For example, like the pool share example, right? Like, well, I think that over time we probably want to allow people to kind of control the issuer better from Soroban. Like I can see how it should be fairly simple to create an issuer from Soroban, given the type of proofs you have. But yeah, from launch, I don't know if we need that, but yeah, I guess we'll see.
I feel like everyone here initially kind of agreed that we don't need this, right? And then we started to talk ourselves into it. Should we just go back to what everyone believed at the beginning, since there actually isn't a strong advocate here? In other words, get rid of it.
Yeah, definitely that's my opinion. I also think that to what Graydon said earlier, the fact that we don't have a path right now to like nativizing a contract, I do think that's something that we will want, and it's something that we have discussed as kind of like an optimization path for popular contracts. So I think that we need to figure that specific thing, how to nativize a contract, regardless of whether or not this specific token implementation will be native or not.
Okay, so we're out of time.
And yeah, I would add to what Thomas just said, like we know there are like other token contracts that are where we're going to have to, make them native, like upgrade them to native, like the first AMM type thing, right? That gets popular, we'll have to figure out how to do it, and that's the same path I think for this conversation, in the context of tokens.
Okay, cool. Well, it seems like then we're probably not going to implement this different token standard. We're going to have separate discussions about how to nativize certain smart contracts, and meanwhile also revisit the earlier discussion about the sort of that Sid has a few things to figure out, and I think that's it for today.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. See y'all later.